All right, that's the alarm for recording in progress. Okay, where are we and where would we like to go? Those are probably the two important questions we've got to ask. So, where are we? We started our journey underlining the importance and primacy of Jewish philosophy, meaning we very much act based on how we think of the world. If you remember our example of who's the aggressor, who's the victim, we act and behave in life according to how we view things. The question is, where do we get where we view things from? Right? If you did a poll of people who are answering the question honestly, they might say some of their views come from people they happen to meet in life, some are circumstantial, some are situations they faced, and hopefully some of it is because they've actually sat down and thought about these issues. Right? So what we're doing is we're sitting down and thinking about these issues. That's our goal. Okay. And we then talked about, in particular, what difference emunah or faith makes in life, both in terms of belief system, but ultimately filtering down through into action. And we talked very openly at the very beginning about difference in major things in terms of right to parent, in other words, giving values to your children, assuming they're correct values, in terms of objective morality versus taste and flavors, in terms of being able to say with kind of real conviction, this is right, this is wrong, and in terms of having I guess, definition to base other things off. Right? In other words, if God has a definition of something, you can be sure it's accurate and true. Now, as we said at the time, there might be difficulty in working out what God's definition is, right? But that doesn't mean he doesn't have one. Okay, those are effectively, that was session one. Then we moved on to defining, or trying to define what emunah is. In other words, hey, Jonathan, in other words, oh, you came in at the right time, Jonathan. We just talked about emunah in terms of faith, we'll call it, whether emunah meant proving God or whether emunah meant believing in God, and it doesn't matter how you believe. And we kind of presented these two sides or approaches, which again, approaches for hundreds of years. Approach number one is that emunah requires or necessitates proving God. And we dabbled in proofs last week, but I'm going to quickly go over that again. Again, emunah necessitates proving God, and therefore all emunah means is being faithful to your knowledge. Right, that we spoke about last week in the terms of two levels. Or whether emunah just means belief, and however you believe, it's okay. In brackets, you need some level of questioning just to make sure that beliefs in general are on the right track. Right? But you don't need to prove, you don't need to set out, and emunah just means belief. That is the other approach. That's totally fine. Now, last week we then deepened both of these quite significantly, and we said that effectively any knowledge has what we would broadly speaking call two qualitative levels. There's what we call knowing something in the head. There's what we call knowing something in the heart. And you'll find many, many examples of this across daily life, to be honest, right? You'll find people who do dangerous things, who on some level realize that this is dangerous, but on a deeper level probably haven't that knowledge hasn't filtered down into their very beings, their very fibers. We call those in Hebrew emunah sichlet, from the word seichel, that means it's in the brain, and emunah chushit, which is chush means it's sensual, it lives within you. Okay, and we use the paradigm examples of the 10 plagues as emunah sichlet, and I'm just going to define that in a second. In other words, intellectual knowledge, whereas Mount Sinai was the bastion of knowing something deep down. Now, how did those work, given that we're on the run up to Pesach? So the 10 plagues didn't prove who God was, didn't prove that God was forming a relationship. They just proved that God existed. If you want to be posh in English, you call it deductive reasoning. In other words, it couldn't possibly be the Egyptian gods that made the blood, turned the river into blood. It couldn't possibly be the Egyptian gods who created hail and fire and water, combining and all the various other plagues. Oh, it must have been that there's a God. That doesn't tell you much about God. That just tells you it can't be anything else but God. You know what I mean? Right? That's deductive. That's intellectual proof. It has to be. It has to come from outside of the system we live in because nothing in the system can possibly explain it. Yeah. But it doesn't tell you what he's like per se. And it definitely doesn't tell you that he wants a relationship with you. Right? For sure not. Yeah. That second piece is left to Matan Torah. In other words, it was only at Mount Sinai that God almost planted something within us, or at least allowed us to experience his presence, such that it made an indelible imprint on our souls and on the future, everyone, to be honest, anyone, the Jewish people, future or current, such that they had almost God consciousness within them, if I can say those words. Right? And therefore, we said proof of God's existence, you can go down the 10 plagues route. In other words, the various, it had to be, and it can't be anyone else, and etc. That's intellectual. That's basic level, so to speak, which is fine. It's great, but it stays at intellectual. And we compared that to, I think over the past week we mentioned things like the watchmaker theory. I was looking at the world and seeing its interdependence and complexity, and saying, well, it must have had a designer, the process that Abraham Avinu effectively went on. Or if you want a bit more profound or complex, the fact that we say that God spoke to 1 million people, which is a very hard lie to make up, because to make up that God spoke to one person, it's doable. But to make up that God spoke to 1 million people, very hard to get into the fabric of history unless it actually happened. But again, that is just intellectual. That's working it out. What we do is we go a level deeper, which is Har Sinai, the giving of the Torah, Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, which is that there was a relationship built. We felt God, and therefore that was real. We didn't need to prove it. It wasn't external to us. Okay, that is effectively where we are so far. Okay, and the sirens outside are nothing to do with Shir being alarming. It shouldn't be. It's just over there. We're on the what's the word on the what's that? The Champs-Élysées of Edgware. The A41. So we get all the action here. Okay, good. So this week I wanted to start the second segment of Emunah. Right? In other words, if Emunah means belief in God, in theory, that means it remains, whether it's over here or down in the heart, but at the end of the day, it's a belief. It might be a knowledge and understanding. You might have proven, you might have really kind of intellectually stretched yourself to proven belief. But at the end of the day, how does it filter down into action? That is the topic of this evening. This is a sister mitzvah called bitachon. Okay, called bitachon. Now, in order to do this, let me just show you a beautiful expression of how, I would say, how Emunah works, or how the system of philosophy and belief is supposed to work. If I was particularly organized, I would have put this on the board right behind me that I'm pointing my pen to. I'm going to do this anyway. So we have the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are made up of 2 sets of 5, meaning on the first set of 5, you've got your mitzvot between man and God. On the second set of 5, you've got your mitzvot between man and man, interpersonal mitzvot. If you have to classify them in terms of thought, speech, and action, right, what would the sequence be? So I'm going to start with you. Yeah, I'm going to help you. The first mitzvah is belief in God. That's thought, speech, or action?
Thought.
Thought, very good. Okay. Then the second mitzvah is don't believe in any other gods. Thought, speech, or action?
Thought.
Thought, very good. Excellent. So we've got 2 thoughts so far. Third mitzvah is don't take the Lord's name in vain.
Speech.
Speech, very good. That's 3. The fourth mitzvah is either observe Shabbat or make Kiddush.
Action.
Action or speech. So we've got thought,
Combination.
speech and action. And the fifth one on that side is honoring your parents.
It's all 3.
Pardon?
Isn't it all 3?
I don't know if it's thought per se, honoring your parents. I once said this to a group of teenagers. And they looked at me, they said, theory. And I said, no, it's not theory.
And you said it's definitely action, but surely I think thought has to come into it as well.
Well, again, so it's important. I should have said this caveat. In all of them, you've probably got elements of each. In other words, you can't believe in other gods, nor can you bow down to other gods. Right? You know what I mean? But where is it rooted in? Right. So I would have said honoring your parents is action. Right?
Yeah.
You do things which honor them, right? So you've got on that side thought, speech, then action. Now let's reverse it. What about on the 5 which are interpersonal mitzvot? So first you've got don't murder, that is
Action.
action, very good. Low, don't commit adultery.
Action.
Action, don't kidnap.
Action.
Action, don't bear false witness.
Speech.
Speech, yeah, you're witnessing, yeah, you're testifying. And then you've got don't be jealous.
Thought.
Thought.
Thought, yeah, so it's interesting. So on the right side, you've got thought, speech, action. On the left side, you've got action, speech, thought.
Mm.
Interesting, right? Okay.
Mm.
So it's a nice pattern. What do we do with the pattern? Right? Anyone in music will tell you have to do something with the pattern. Or art, to be honest. So Rav Shimshon
We're
Bar-
Jews, so we argue about the pattern and have different opinions.
yeah. Who says it's your pattern? I don't believe in your pattern. Why should I say just because you said it? Maybe I was going to say it. Who says you have a right to make a pattern up anyway? I'm going to sue you for the pattern. Anyway, so Rav Shimshon Bar Hirsch says that the pattern is, of course, significant and intentional. He says when it comes to between man and God, the way you work on it is that first you get your thoughts straightened out as your belief systems, then you express that and deepen that in speech. Right? And then you make it even more, I'd say, real or expressed, internalized in action, concretized, sorry, in action. So you've got thought, speech, and action. When it comes to interpersonal development, you can't start with thought. So if you want to be a kind person, you can't like sit on a mountain and meditate and say, oh, I want to be kind. It's so amazing to be kind. I wish I could be kind. Yeah, it doesn't work like that, right? First, you have to do actions which are kind. That's action. That then filters down into your speech, and then eventually that impacts your thoughts. Right? So he says it's showing you the way you work on each area of development and discipline. Okay. So tonight, our journey towards bitachon, which literally means liftoach bitachon, in Hebrew means security, but it means reliance or trust. Okay, so let's see if we can define that. Again, it's the sister mitzvah of emunah, and let's see if we can work that out, what it is. Not so simple, by the way, but let's see if we can work out what it is. So I'm going to read you a couple of sources here, actually on the booklet that I put on the WhatsApp group, and that talk about what bitachon means and how it relates to emunah. So he says like this. The first one is the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish passed away in 1953. And he writes as follows. He's got a book called Emunah and Bitachon. He says that this, Emunah and Bitachon achat hi. They're one concept. Right? He says Emunah is the general way a person looks at the world, and Bitachon is a way that you look at your own life. He continues. He says Emunah b'bchinat halacha, Bitachon b'bchinat maaseh. In other words, Emunah is the theory, and bitachon is the practice. Right? Interesting. In other words, emunah is the belief that God exists, and bitachon, we would say, is the trusting or the reliance upon Him. Okay. So if I think of thought is emunah, speech is we're going to do next week is tefillah, prayer. The thing that connects them is bitachon. In other words, relying on Hashem. So, for example, let's say a person is, I don't know, in the middle of a business deal or in the middle of some form of meeting, and either it's time to daven or it's time for Shabbos, for example. Right? And now they're faced with this moral dilemma, which is, should I leave? Should I stay? You know, how does that compute? Right? If one, well, actually, forget what one chooses for a second, that is a dilemma of faith, but actually it's a dilemma of bitachon. In other words, relying and trusting on Hashem, that if I make the right decision, I'm actually not going to lose out. Right? In other words, bitachon is the muscle which says, I believe in God, I know that, but I'm actually going to rely on Him. I'm actually going to trust Him. Okay? So in other words, it's like the next stage on. To be honest, there's a philosophical step between emunah and bitachon that we haven't probably talked about enough, which we're going to deal with when we talk about why God made the world, which is emunah doesn't just believe God exists, and emunah, isn't just the belief that God exists. Emunah is the belief that God is involved. Bitachon is the expression that God is involved. Yeah, Jonathan, go for it.
It'd be really good if you could maybe distill it into like if we could take like an example. Let's say I was reading something recently about a group of like men who went to Meron, and there was a story about how they were going to be right there, right at the front when the tragedy happened, but one of the men had to. His father wanted him to be in Jerusalem with him, so he left there, went to Jerusalem, and he was unharmed in the tragedy that happened. So if you take any example, or I wanted to catch a bus and I didn't get that bus, and then that bus got into an accident. If you can take any example, how would you split that into those two sections of emunah and bitachon.
Yeah, okay, good. So firstly, it's such a good question. I'm going to take off my jumper. Yeah. Um,
It's heating
oh,
up now.
yeah, they are, yeah. Like, I don't know what it was. I was giving a share on Zoom. I just can't remember. I was also really, really hungry. So whenever anyone asks a question, I kind of have a little bit of a bite or something next to me. So I was trying to encourage as many questions as possible, so I could quickly off camera. Anyway, okay, so it's important that what you asked, Jonathan. Firstly, bitachon isn't in hindsight. That's quite important. Now, the bitachon isn't simply, oh, it worked out well in hindsight, or if you like, in retrospect, I can see God's hand, right? Bitachon is when you rely on Him kind of live. Right? So either in terms of prayer is probably an example where you ask Hashem for X, Y, or Z, and we're actually going to work that in a second, in a couple of minutes. But whenever you make a decision, often it's foregoing something because you trust in God. So I think a good example is actually limiting, let's say, your work hours or your business hours because you're doing something, so to speak, for God. So again, whether that's Shabbos, whether it's going to shul, etc., I'm taking time off X because I trust that actually, no, God's got my back, and He's going to provide me with money or parnasa, and as much as I have or I need, He's got that. That's a good example of bitachon. But again, it's live. It's not seeing God merely in hindsight. It's a bit easier, so to speak, to see God in hindsight because that doesn't call for me to make a decision. That's just evaluating what was, right? It's when it's live, that's when the bitachon muscle is built. It makes
Okay,
sense?
but then you said before that it's an understanding that God was there. I think you said like that God is involved. So I
Yes.
understand that one is live, but in a case where maybe something only becomes apparent when you look back at it, then is that emunah?
Oh, interesting. No, I'd say both emunah and bitachon are that God exists and God is involved, but emunah is believing it, bitachon is actually acting it out. I think where thought moves to action, that becomes bitachon. Again, the way the Chazon Ish puts it, it's a nice little succinct phrase. Bitachon is where that perspective is acted out in practice, basically. And giving tzedakah is a good example, right? In other words, giving tzedakah and believing one isn't going to lose out through giving tzedakah, that's a really good act of bitachon, to be honest. Yeah. Again, it doesn't mean giving all your money away. Right? We've actually got limits as to how much a person can give away. You can't give away your money such that you'll become poor yourself, right? But giving away tzedakah is a good example. It's a really good example. Okay. And the truth is, life will present itself various examples of bitachon. It just will. It will. Whenever it's certainly financial decisions, and definitely when it comes to giving, that's a great test of bitachon. And it just is often, often charities that are doing really good things will sit down and they'll make a budget for the year, right? And they'll say, well, okay, we think this is etc., but we can't know everything. So where are you going to err on the side of? Are you going to say, well, we don't know, so therefore, we can't do, we can't help, etc.? Or will we say, well, actually, hold on a second, I think it will be okay. At the end of the year, we'll be okay. We have bitachon, not in a crazy way, right? But we believe in what we're doing, and therefore, we're going to carry on, not in a reckless way. And by the end of the year, we'll have the money. Yeah, that kind of thing. All very in theory, of course. It's not that I work for it's not that I work for a charity, but that's another good example of bitachon. Okay, good. All right, now let's see, as Jonathan always does, he gets us to the right point, which is what exactly does bitachon mean? All right, let's see if we can really nail it. All right, so having doubled down on what Jonathan said, I'm going to come back and agree with half of what he said. Okay, you right? You ready for this? So, what is bitachon? It's the general attitude or acted out of reliance on God. Fantastic. So I'm relying on Him. Great. Now, and by the way, phones are another good example of bitachon. When you're in the middle of doing something which is spiritually good, you're davening, you're learning, something like that, and the phone goes, and it's that person who you wanted to speak to and couldn't get hold of for ages or whatever, right? When the phone goes, and for me, it always does. As soon as I'm going downstairs to learn with my learning partner, the phone always goes. It's like, always. Yeah. And it always seems very urgent. It always seems very urgent. And that's another good example of bitachon. Can I say no? At the moment, I'm focused on this. Yeah, and I'll get the phone later. If it's meant to be, I'll get him later. All right. Okay. So what is bitachon? Let's see if we can drill down a little bit and understand it better. So there is what seems on the surface of it a major debate as to what bitachon is. Now, hold on a second, Jonathan. You're going to be jumping because the Chazon Ish says something very, 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 very close to what you said. But we're going to see Rav Dessler seems to disagree. Essentially, they both died in 1953. They both lived in Israel. And they have different views on what bitachon is. And then I'm going to quote, hopefully, another source from the Malbim, who lived about 100 years earlier, who also has a say on bitachon. So here we go. So the Chazon Ish says like this. He says, bitachon is the understanding that everything Hashem does is for the best. Interesting. I'll say that again. Everything Hashem does is for the best. So he says like this. He says you can't straitjacket life. Right? In other words, you can't say, for example, I have total bitachon, then I'm going to get a promotion at work. Yeah, he says you can't do that. Why can't you do that? Because who are you to straitjacket what's the correct outcome for you in that scenario? Maybe a promotion is good for you. Maybe it's not good for you. Maybe a promotion means that you're going to see your family less. Maybe a promotion means that you're going to be more stressed. Maybe a promotion means that you're going to be, you're going to have to start firing people. Who says that's good for you? Right? So he says what it means is understanding that whatever Hashem does for you is for the best. That's very similar. That's very close to what you said before, Jonathan. Because it does sound a little bit more hindsight-esque. But it's not necessarily putting all the pieces in place. It's just the general understanding of whatever Hashem does is for the best. Now, of course, we know historically, sometimes that's an easier attitude to develop than others, right? But again, this is more particular to you. Whatever Hashem does everything for you for the best. Doesn't mean also for other people, right? But your thing is for you, okay? Now, the Malbim almost adds a notch, even though he's living 100 years or so before the Chazon Ish. He says not only that, he says in bitachon, even if you hope for a certain outcome, but you can't straitjacket the means, just the end result. In other words, let's say and by the way, this doesn't mean that you can't daven for it. You can daven for whatever you want. But in terms of relying on it, the Malbim says it's not about the means, it's about the end. So for example, let's say you say, Hashem, you're thinking, right, I'm going to buy a lottery ticket. I'm going to completely rely on God. Yeah, God's going to make me win. I'm going to rely on him. Yeah, I'm going to buy that lottery ticket. Well, firstly, who says you're supposed to win the lottery? That's what the Chazon Ish would say to you, right? Number one. And secondly, you don't really want to win the lottery. You just want to have money. So who says it's your right to kind of say, well, I want to have money, and the only way for me to have money is to win the lottery? But who gave you the right to say that? You can't straitjacket the means. Right, that's what the Malbim says. Right, so again, the Chazon Ish says something fascinating. Again, one more time. Bitachon doesn't mean picking a specific outcome. It means whatever Hashem does is for the best. By the way, we have a bit of a source for this in Jewish history, which is sometimes, unfortunately, we do entertain the possibility that bad things will happen. La'aleinu, back in the day, where the army, the Jewish army, when they went out to war, they used to write conditional divorce bills to their wives in case they never came back. Right? There was actually talk in the Israeli army of doing that about 50 years ago. In the end, they decided not to. But that would prevent what we call aguna situations, etc., where someone hasn't really been divorced, etc., they can't remarry, right? That was, again, they're entertaining a possibility that, God forbid, something bad would happen, right? They're entertaining that possibility. Before we go out to war, there'd be someone who'd announce, whoever has recently got married or recently bought a house, they should go back from the front line because they may never come back from the front line and they'll never be able to, enjoy that marriage or enjoy that house. Yeah, again, we're entertaining a possibility that something bad may happen. Now, is that a lack of bitachon? No, it's not, because it means whatever is Hashem's plan is, Hashem's plan is.
But surely you not going to the front might just mean that Hashem has to make a brick fall on your head if you're due to die. Like, how does that help? And conversely, if you go to the front,
we're going to learn about that more when it comes to free will. You're right. But there's certain situations that objectively are more dangerous than others. And that is taken into account as well. In others, let's say Gideon, yeah, please don't follow this example, right? But let's say you'd say, look, you know what? I know where you live, Gideon. That's not a threat. I know where you live. Yeah. You'd say, right, I'm going to walk across the A41 on Champs-Élysées outside. Yeah. I'm going to walk across the A41 blindfolded. Because if Hashem feels it's my time, it's my time. Yeah. I wouldn't advise that because firstly, you're going to hold up all the traffic, Gideon. Right? Secondly, it's particularly dangerous. Right? Now, surely what happened to it's my time, it's my time. So there's certain acts of negligence, or at least where things are more dangerous, that can cause, the Gemara calls them a time of danger, whereby a person needs more merits to survive that situation. That's why on Friday night, by the way, we say that there are 3 times that particularly three mitzvahs that allow women to have an easier or less dangerous childbirth. Right, the 3 female mitzvahs. The Gemara is very clear. There's nothing to do with women per se. It's any time there's a time of danger, right? A person needs more merits to survive. The Gemara says, for example, going on a rickety bridge, right, or whatever it is, dangerous things. I don't know what would be nowadays examples of common things that are dangerous. Certain, elements of difficult travel. Going on Wizz Air. No, I'm joking. We've been on Wizz Air. It's fine. Like dangerous travel. Whatever it is. Yeah,
the sugar run on motorbike. Yeah,
whatever it is, right? You need more merit to be okay for that. Okay, so again, let's put that in a box. So you've got your Malbim and your Chazon Ish effectively that are saying bitachon means trusting Hashem that whatever's for the best, whatever will be, will be. That's fine. It's for the best. Rav Dessler says no. Rav Dessler says no. You can even trust on Hashem for a certain outcome. And he proves it from a couple of Gemaras, actually. The Gemara says that Hillel was walking near his village and he saw a fire. And he says to God, I have full trust that that's not coming from my house. It's not endangering anyone. Right? Now, how could he say that if he doesn't, how can he hope for a specific outcome? So if that's what it says, you can. Right? And the truth is, they may not be in opposition to each other. If you're on a level that the way you see the world is somewhat in sync with the way God sees the world, then you can probably have a bitachon about a specific outcome because you're aligned, right? If you're not aligned, then you probably, then the Chazon Ish is probably right. In other words, who are you to suggest a specific outcome? There are many people whose lives have been enriched by winning the lottery. And there are many people whose lives, unfortunately, have not been enriched and actually for the worse because they won the lottery. You know what I mean? So who are you to say, right, specific outcome in terms of bitachon? Okay, so those are a couple of really important things. The last thing, just in terms of bitachon to note, is a lot depends on your level. In other words, if you're someone who can rely on Hashem more genuinely, because you have that, then you're allowed to rely on Hashem more, but you can't fake it. I'll give you a good example in the Torah itself. There's a group called the Ma'apilim. The Ma'apilim were those who, after the sin of the spies, they said to Moshe, even though you said we have to walk around the desert 40 years, but we can do it. We're okay. We're going to prove that we can run into the land of Israel. And they did. Moshe said, don't do it. They did it anyway, and they got killed. So that Rav Avram, the son of the Rambam, says this is an example where bitachon was not genuine. And they were trying to hit a level that wasn't there. Right? They weren't on the level they could hope for miracles and just run into Israel where Moshe had said no. Right? That's an example where bitachon isn't there. Okay. So what I'm going to do next week, please God, we'll hit 8:30, is I'm going to summarize what bitachon is properly. Again, at the moment it means relying on Hashem. Right? In other words, being able to say, well, I'm actually not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to trust or rely on Hashem. Again, without miracles, and of course, it doesn't mean thinking that I'm not going to go to work and there's going to be a golden hen next door to me, etc. That's not for us. Right? Or just lottery. Rabbi Fine said, buy a lottery ticket, and that's okay. I'm handing in my resignation. Yeah, I didn't say that. Right? Bitachon means knowing your level and relying on Hashem to the degree that you can. And then, please God, we're going to use that to start understanding what tefillah, what davening is. Good? All right. Have a good night, everyone. Good to see everyone. I don't know how people seem to look younger each week. You have to teach me how.
Go off camera. That's the key.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.